The biggest challenge that I've seen in terms of continuity behind the omnichannel experience is around pricing. So people will see a price online and they'll call their reps in an effort to get a better price. And if they do get a better price, then it just undermines the entire web experience.
Super excited for the podcast today with Anna. We get into everything analytics and product management related. We got a really good episode up ahead. Welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert's Perspective. Joining us today, we have Anna Lazzarini, who's the Director of Customer Experience and Analytics for Whitecap. So really excited to have you on the show, Anna.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Anna, so you and I have known each other for a couple of years now from your time at MSC, but why don't you kick us off by talking to us a bit about your career journey and how you ended up heading up your department at Whitecap?
Sure. So, quick note before we jump in. So, my views are my own. But in terms of my background, I've been in B2B e-commerce since 2014, starting in office supply. And since then, I've spent some time in industrial supply and most recently construction supply. And whenever I'm talking to anybody outside of the e-commerce world about what I do, which is almost all of my friends and family, generally how I explain my job is that I help B2B companies grow by improving their customer experience.
That makes a bit of sense. And just to really kick us off, do you want to maybe broadly define, like, what's the grandma kind of test or the 6-year-old test for explaining what you do?
That's a good question. It's always tough. I mean, I would say I'm just helping the businesses grow by improving their customer experience, which customer experience, like if I had to distill it down, would be getting the right product to the right job site, in my case, because I'm in construction supply, at the right time. So if all of that is happening, then you've got a great customer experience. And to bring it to life a little bit for people who are outside of B2B, I generally try to get them to reorient around what their favorite companies are. So, for example, in my day-to-day life, one of my favorite places to shop is Costco because they make it so delightful to go in there to get my free samples. Their merchandising team is incredible. Like, they always have great new products. Plus, their private label brands are so good that, like, to me, I'm like, that is a great customer experience. That feeling and like the fandom that you develop around businesses that you love is what a great customer experience looks like.
Obviously, you've worked across different industries, a lot in the current industry that you're in. What are some of the negative real world consequences of not having a dialed in customer experience for your primary persona, which is a contractor?
I think it to be specific, but pretty detrimental to let your customers down because if you're not getting them the product that they need, then they can't serve their customers. Like, again, if we can reorient around our personal lives, like if I'm a Jira user and Jira fails for an hour, that makes me feel like my day is derailed, even though the long-term impact of that is so small. But for our customers, if we're not getting the right product to a job site, that actually can cause a day-long delay or multiple days long. So you end up draining your customers of their most precious assets, which is their time and their money. The flip side of that is that when it works really well, you have shared interest, right? So like if we're winning, our customers are winning and vice versa. And that feels really good.
Makes sense. And what's a good measure of that, like from a KPI standpoint? Obviously, a lot of people measure things like NPS and there's other KPIs, but like for this specific use case, what are some of the KPIs that you guys look at?
That's a good question. If I had to distill it down to a few, NPS, yes, is a classic. I use it even though it's fallen out of favor with some folks. But some of the other ones that I like to look at are order frequency, ideally at the account level. So a lot of B2B businesses will probably relate to this in terms of there being like a concentration of very important accounts and then a long tail of a lot of other accounts. So the intent with looking at order frequency at the account level is that people just generally don't announce their departure. They'll slowly kind of like siphon off business elsewhere once they find suitable alternatives. So that's why you really want to keep an eye on that. And if there is something wrong, making sure that you're engaging with the reps to get information on what's happening there. And another piece is order fill rate. And this is another one that ideally it would be best to get it at the account level, because if you look at the order fill rate overall, it could hide trends that are happening with your most important customers.
Very interesting. On the back of the KPIs, you've mentioned account level a few times. Is it generally pretty hard to get that type of view, or should it be easy?
Extremely.
Maybe talk to us a bit about that. Why is it so challenging?
Yeah, it's funny. When I was interviewing with Whitecap, what I asked in I think almost every single panel interview that I had was, how do you define the customer? Because I think that that's such an important piece of information to have ironed out. And usually, what I see in B2B organizations is that it varies from team to team. Like the way that finance defines a customer is probably going to be what the organization looks like overall. But what I might define as a customer for operating as part of like an e-commerce business is probably different. And the reason for that is because you have job sites, physical locations that there are multiple entities engaging, and each one of those entities have other job sites where they're doing the exact same thing, but they could be operating in different capacities in different job sites, which means the way that you sell into those job sites and those entities at one location differs from another. So it really depends on like the team and the context in which you're going to be engaging with the customer that's going to inform what the customer definition should be.
If you're listening to the Ecommerce Toolbox, you're entitled to a podcast-exclusive website audit. Go to noibu.com/podcast-audit for a free scan that uncovers the hidden friction blocking your conversions and shows you where you're leaking revenue.
In your specific industry, obviously digital channels are becoming more and more important. Talk to me a bit about like how do some of the KPIs and how you look at building those experience, how is it different in B2B from B2C? Like, for example, is cart abandonment rate lower? Because like, should that a cart abandonment rate in theory be like zero, or obviously not zero, but as close to zero as possible? Whereas like in consumer, like people expect kind of like 50%.
That's another good question. So the way that you would look at kind of like the traditional e-commerce funnel, at the end of the day, we're all humans. So like we all want an easy search, find, buy process. But the way that your customers think is going to be a little bit different. So in an industry like industrial supply, as an example, product data becomes really, really important. Whereas for me, if I'm shopping for a sweater and something that is called indigo looks like a little bit more navy, it's not really a big deal. But for a manufacturer, if something is not spec'd out appropriately, you won't be able to use it. So that's a key distinction. And in terms of like some of the KPIs, like cart abandonment, I know is one that you brought up. The way that you instrument it, there ends up being like a little bit of minutia. So if you just used out of the box cart abandonment, it's probably not going to be what you want because you're not taking into account the carts that move into workflow approvals. So like a cart not converting within one user session is potentially not bad if that cart is moving to an approver and then getting approved and then converting. So it's like the little details like that where you have to understand how your customer is actually using the website, and it'll change how you track things.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like analytics in general is going to be pretty challenging. Do you have an example of where you had to take customer feedback and it was good feedback, but you probably had to decipher it and translate it to something that's actionable, and how you really are able to take some of this, like in some cases, rough customer feedback and like take it through the whole pipeline to implement change?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that like you or I would talk about an e-commerce journey is completely different than the way that like a procurement customer on a job site would talk about e-commerce. They're not going to say, when I searched for XYZ and give you their exact query and the results that they were expecting and the results that they wanted. What they're going to say is, your search sucks, fix it. You're making my job harder. And then that's where relying on session recording software becomes super important, because you can kind of reverse engineer based on your own knowledge of the industry what they wanted.
Very interesting. So basically, you get very broad, inactionable feedback, and then you have to bring it back. Do you have an example of a project that you worked on, maybe search or something else that kind of came on the back of this type of feedback?
So this was like a few years ago. We were in the midst of a replatforming and we were slowly migrating over users. And so we started to get complaints that bubbled up around users not being able to log in and just generally like kind of like a small barrage of login feedback that we didn't really know what to make of. But through using like a session recording software like Noibu would have, you see what's happening. And like that is a huge unlock to prove that there is an issue because when we initially brought this to our devs, we said, hey, there's a problem with login. Of course, the first question is always, well, what are the steps to reproduce it? And we couldn't reproduce it because unbeknownst to us, it was race condition violation. So it was an intermittent issue that we didn't know how to get on our end because effectively you'd get it by chance. So as they migrated more users, like the voices around this became louder and louder. And so once we were able to put together like a view that showed the spike in call volume, the feedback that the customer's describing, the proof of their sessions, our NPS score plummeting, like that was the point at which we were able to get the right resources assigned to it. And that's also like a big reason why customer feedback alone just isn't going to cut it. Like generally, when you have just feedback from customers, people perceive it to be anecdotal or unreliable when it exists on its own. You really have to put like some discipline and rigor behind it to get people's attention.
Very cool. No, it makes a lot of sense. It's interesting how in some organizations, the culture is to like almost put the homework on the customer. And it's almost like we assume that they're wrong until proven otherwise versus assume that they're right until proven otherwise, which I think is potentially a bit more productive. Talk to us a bit about omni-channel like handoffs. So like you mentioned before, okay, well, it depends how you define cart abandonment. Well, what if they just call their account director and the account director just like keys it in manually? Like, how do you then shore that up online? Talk to us a bit about like the omni-channel handoffs. You have reps, you have old school mixing with new school. Like, how does that come to play in B2B?
Yeah. So the biggest challenge that I've seen in terms of continuity behind the omnichannel experience is around pricing. So people will see a price online and they'll call their reps in an effort to get a better price. And if they do get a better price, then it just undermines the entire web experience. And you kind of coach your customers to go directly to their reps instead of using a self-service option. That's kind of like the biggest area. So there are like a few pieces of information that you really want to make sure are right across your systems, which would be product availability, pricing, lead times, shipping costs. If the price or the shipping cost is undermined through kind of like these conversations, then you're not going to capture the transaction.
That's actually interesting. And if it happens once, then you're training your customer basically to go back and repeat that. That's interesting. I wouldn't have expected that. That's really interesting. Something that you and I have chatted a lot about offline, fragmented systems like analytics, session replay. How do you start to think of these things in the context of B2B, right? Like you have some legacy systems. I don't know about your current business, but like often in B2B, we find a lot of legacy systems. An ERP that was built by IBM in the 80s that's like still powering a lot of the business. Yeah, like how are you thinking about like your system design and the tools that you're bringing in?
Yeah, I think from like an enterprise standpoint, you definitely need to have defined sources of truth, the real-time data, and the right system architecture to make the important information that we just talked about available and consistent, whether it's a branch employee looking for that information or a customer going to the website and looking for that information. From an analytics perspective, analytics is like the Wild West in terms of how data is captured and how data is defined. So part of what I skipped over in my background is that like my background's in finance. Like in finance, if you call something revenue, you have like a team of accountants that are saying like, yes, this is how revenue is defined. Whereas for sessions, you have Adobe, Google, Amplitude, these different like analytics players defining by their own definition what a session is. So you have to go in, and my happy path is like limiting the number of tools as much as possible because I want to give everybody one source of truth. And if you have a lot of different metrics that are similarly named floating around, it can undermine your program because people see the different numbers and they say, well, you said conversion was this over here and now it's this over here. Why is it different? There's usually a logical explanation for it, but to the untrained eye, it just looks like bad housekeeping.
It's funny you say that. And I think you said this, like, there is no perfect way of measuring it. So you kind of just have to pick the imperfect way and stick to it. Because you're never going to get the number that you're like fully, like everything's perfect. But switching around between systems, and yeah, I've seen this play out firsthand, is in a business, they're looking at the system, or executives have access to this system, but everyone works out of this one. And then it becomes this like, well, what's the actual baseline? Because if it's this, we're screwed. If it's this, we're geniuses. So like, we're kind of like confused and stuck in the middle. So yeah, no, that I think that makes sense. And that's kind of obviously part of what we've been working on as well. How are you guys thinking about maybe pushing some of your client base in B2B to self-service, where you have that kind of strange, and maybe I'll take a bit of a detour here. One of my cousins works in Jersey in liquor sales, and his company spent, I think, like $7 or $8 million on this like portal. It was like very like Deloitte, KPMG designed and built like waterfall style to basically try and automate orders. And the field basically rejected the system. And they've been trying to like shove it down everyone's throat. And like, I've played with it. It's pretty bad, to be honest. It's like really like buggy and like doesn't really work and it's not intuitive. And they had to like abandon the project. And like, that's like a almost $10 million like 4-year initiative. So like, how are you thinking about like pushing innovation into the field and making sure that you're not building kind of the next expensive piece of shelfware?
Yeah, the use case that you just described like sends chills down my spine, but it happens all the time. And I think the way that you avoid that is through partnership with the field. This is something that I'm a really big believer in because oftentimes when a newly formed e-commerce team is brought in and there's a robust field organization, the field has the potential to feel threatened by it and imagine scenarios where a website is going to replace their job, which just would not happen for the industries that I've been in. The relationships are so important. You can't replace it with a good e-commerce experience, but what you do want is to make sure that the field has the website and the customers have the website as a tool at their disposal that's reliable and performant. So I think a big, like, an important lever to pull whenever you're rolling out a project like this is to really partner closely with the field and understand both from their perspective what the customer wants and also what they want from a tool. Because if you could drive value for field users in the tool as well, then everybody's using it and everybody's happy.
I mean, it seems obvious in hindsight, but I bet you they didn't do that.
No, it doesn't sound like it.
No, that's awesome. And as we look to wrap up, what's top of mind for you going into kind of this year and as you start to build out your roadmap and your strategy for the year?
You already know this all too well, Kaylin. I've got a lot of work ahead of me and I'm looking to revamp my analytics stack. So kind of like getting a refresher course on who the major players are in analytics and who are doing like the hot new things has kind of been my charter most recently. So I'm excited to build a new analytics stack that's super powerful and gets us the insights that we need.
Love it. And this was a great episode, Anna. Appreciate you hopping on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
The E-commerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noibu. To find out more about Noibu and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noibu.com. That's Noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the E-commerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noibu, thanks for listening.